At Riverside Children's Medical Center, a brilliant pediatric surgeon works double shifts while secretly battling to save his own daughter's life. Dr. Michael Martin's world revolves around operating rooms, sleepless nights, and the constant fear that his medical expertise might not be enough for the one patient who matters most. When an abandoned little girl named Maddy Lopez whispers those life-changing words during his lowest moment, he has no idea that this innocent question will expose a decades-old conspiracy and transform him from a desperate father into an unlikely hero whose story will touch millions around the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Children's Medical Center cast their familiar pale glow across the pediatric wing as Dr. Michael Martin finished his third surgery of the day. His surgical scrubs, still damp with perspiration, clung to his shoulders as he made his way through the quiet corridors toward the one room that both gave him hope and broke his heart daily, room 314, where his 8-year-old daughter Emma lay fighting acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Michael's reflection in the hospital's polished windows showed a man aged beyond his 34 years. The demanding schedule of being one of the hospital's top pediatric surgeons, combined with the emotional weight of watching his own child battle cancer, had carved deep lines around his eyes and streaked his dark hair with premature silver. But it was a burden he carried willingly, even desperately. Being at the hospital meant being close to Emma, and his position gave him access to the best possible care for her condition. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could perform miracles for other people's children while feeling helpless watching his own daughter's battle. Emma had been diagnosed 6 months ago, shortly after his wife Rachel had died in a car accident. In the span of 3 devastating weeks, Michael had gone from being a happily married father to a widowed single parent dealing with his child's life-threatening illness. The medical bills, even with his physician's insurance, were mounting faster than his salary could cover. He'd already mortgaged their home twice and taken on every extra shift the hospital would allow. Dr. Martin? Nurse Patricia Williams appeared beside him, her voice gentle but concerned. "Emma's been asking for you. She's having trouble sleeping again." Michael nodded, quickening his pace. The experimental treatment Emma was receiving showed promise, but the side effects were brutal. The chemotherapy had taken her beautiful auburn curls months ago, and the medications left her nauseous and weak. Yet somehow she maintained the bright spirit that had always been her defining characteristic. "Daddy!" Emma's face lit up despite her obvious fatigue as he entered her room. The sterile white walls were covered with drawings from her former classmates and get-well cards from the medical staff who had grown to love the brave little girl with the infectious smile. "Hey, sweetheart," Michael said, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed that had become his second home. "How are you feeling tonight?" "Better now that you're here," she whispered, reaching for his hand with fingers that seemed too thin, too fragile. "Will you tell me about the surgeries you did today? I like hearing about how you helped the other kids." Michael smiled, beginning to describe his day in terms an 8-year-old could understand, carefully editing out the more frightening details. As he spoke, he noticed Emma's attention drifting toward the hallway outside her room. Following her gaze, he saw what had captured her interest: a small figure in a hospital gown standing uncertainly in the doorway of the room across the hall. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with long dark hair that hung limply around a pale, thin face. Unlike the constant stream of visitors that filled most pediatric rooms, this child appeared to be completely alone. No balloons, no flowers, no family members hovering anxiously nearby. Just a little girl who looked lost and frightened in the maze of medical equipment and sterile hospital efficiency. "Who is that, Daddy?" Emma asked, her voice filled with the natural curiosity and compassion that had always defined her personality. "I'm not sure, honey," Michael replied, studying the child with growing concern. As a pediatric surgeon, he knew most of the long-term patients on this floor, but this little girl was unfamiliar to him. She must be new. The child noticed them watching and quickly disappeared back into her room, but not before Michael caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that he recognized all too well. the particular kind of loneliness that came from facing medical treatment without family support. "She looks sad," Emma observed with the straightforward honesty that children possess. "Maybe she doesn't have anyone to tell her stories." Michael felt his heart clench. Even while battling her own illness, Emma's first instinct was to worry about another child's emotional well-being. It was a trait she'd inherited from her mother, Rachel, who had volunteered at homeless shelters and food banks until the day she died. "You're right, sweetheart," he said softly. "Maybe tomorrow we can find a way to say hello and make her more welcome." Emma nodded enthusiastically, already making plans. "We could share some of my books with her, and maybe Nurse Patricia has extra coloring books." As the evening wore on and Emma finally drifted off to sleep, Michael found himself unable to shake the image of the lonely child across the hall. He'd seen hundreds of pediatric patients over the years, but something about this particular little girl's situation tugged at his professional instincts and his parental heart. Making his rounds later that night, Michael deliberately walked past room 311, hoping to catch a glimpse of the new patient's chart or perhaps speak with her attending physician. The room was dark, but he could see the small figure curled up in the hospital bed, clutching what appeared to be a worn stuffed animal. "Can't sleep either?" he asked softly from the doorway, not wanting to startle her. The child's head turned toward him, and in the dim light from the hallway, he could see large, dark eyes studying him with a mixture of wariness and hope. "Are you a doctor?" she asked in a small voice that carried a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "I am," Michael replied, stepping carefully into the room. "I'm Dr. Martin. I work here at the hospital." "My name is Maddy," she whispered. "Maddy Lopez." "It's nice to meet you, Maddy. How are you feeling tonight?" She was quiet for a long moment, and Michael could see her carefully considering her words. When she finally spoke, her question was so unexpected, so innocent and profound, that it stopped her completely in his tracks. "Mister, are you an angel?" The simple question hit Michael like a physical blow. In all his years of medical training, in all his experience dealing with frightened children and worried parents, no one had ever asked him something so pure, so hopeful, and so heartbreaking. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" he managed to say, his voice rougher than intended. "Because you came to check on me when nobody else did," Maddy replied with the matter-of-fact logic of a child. "And you have kind eyes, like the angels in the books my mama used to read to me." Michael felt tears threatening for the first time since Rachel's funeral. This little girl, alone and scared in a hospital room, still had enough faith to believe in angels, and somehow she'd mistaken him, a tired, overwhelmed single father who was barely keeping his own world together, for one of them. "I'm not an angel, Maddy," he said gently, "but I'd like to be your friend, if that's okay with you." Her smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I'd like that very much." As Michael left Maddy's room that night, he had no idea that this chance encounter would be the beginning of something extraordinary. He couldn't have imagined that this abandoned little girl's simple question would uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the medical establishment, or that their growing friendship would ultimately expose secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. All he knew was that tomorrow he would make sure Maddy Lopez never felt alone again. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The next morning brought an unusual commotion to the pediatric wing that would change everything. Dr. Michael Martin arrived for his early rounds to find the nursing station buzzing with hushed conversations and concerned whispers. Patricia Williams approached him with a worried expression, clutching a clipboard against her chest. "Dr. Martin, we have a situation with the new patient in room 311, she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Maddy Lopez, the little girl you spoke with last night." Michael felt his stomach tighten. What kind of situation? Is she all right medically? "That's just it," Patricia lowered her voice further. We can't locate any of her medical records. No admission paperwork, no insurance information, no emergency contacts. It's like she appeared out of nowhere. That's impossible, Michael said, frowning. Every patient has to have. I know what every patient is supposed to have, Patricia interrupted, her 20 years of nursing experience evident in her tone. But Dr. Harrison from administration is asking questions, and frankly, some of the answers aren't adding up. Michael's mind raced. In all his years at Riverside Children's Medical Center, he'd never encountered a situation like this. Children don't simply materialize in hospital beds without extensive documentation and approval processes. Who authorized her admission? He asked. That's the strange part, Patricia said, consulting her clipboard. The authorization came from the top floor, Dr. Whitmore's office directly. But when we called to verify, his secretary claimed no knowledge of any special admission orders. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore was the chief of staff at Riverside, a man whose influence extended far beyond the hospital walls. If the authorization had come from his office, there had to be a legitimate explanation. What about her condition? I asked. Patricia's expression grew even more troubled. That's another mystery. Her chart lists routine observation, but Dr. Chen, who examined her yesterday, found signs of systematic poisoning, heavy metals in her blood work that shouldn't be there. The pieces weren't fitting together, and Michael felt a growing sense of unease. A child with mysterious origins, unexplained medical conditions, and authorization from the highest levels of hospital administration. It had all the hallmarks of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple paperwork error. Has anyone contacted Child Protective Services? He asked. Dr. Harrison tried yesterday, Patricia replied. But here's where it gets really strange. They claim no knowledge of placing any child at our facility. And when he pressed for more information, he was told the matter was being handled by appropriate federal authorities. Federal authorities. The words sent a chill down Michael's spine. What kind of situation involving a 6-year-old child would require federal intervention? I need to check on her, Michael said, already moving toward room 311. Dr. Martin, Patricia called after him, be careful. There are people asking questions about who's been interacting with her. Michael paused, turning back. What kind of people? He asked. The kind who don't look like they work for the hospital, she said meaningfully.
As Michael approached Maddy's room, he noticed immediately that the atmosphere had changed from the previous night. 2 men in dark suits stood at the end of the hallway, their attention focused on the pediatric wing in a way that had nothing to do with medical care. Their presence was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of professional surveillance that suggested serious stakes. Room 311's door was slightly ajar, and through the gap Michael could see Maddy sitting up in bed, staring out the window with an expression far too solemn for a child her age. She looked even smaller in the daylight, more fragile, and there was something about her stillness that spoke of someone who had learned to be very, very careful. "Good morning, Maddy," Michael said softly, knocking gently on the doorframe. Her face transformed the moment she saw him, lighting up with genuine joy that made his heart clench. "You came back," she exclaimed, then immediately lowered her voice, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I promised I'd be your friend," Michael said, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "And I always keep my promises." Maddy studied his face with those unnaturally serious dark eyes. "Are you really a doctor? Like a real doctor who helps sick children?" "I am. I'm a surgeon. I help children who need operations to get better." "Do you know why I'm here?" she asked, and there was something in her tone, a mixture of hope and fear that made Michael's protective instincts flare. "I was hoping you could tell me," he said carefully. "Do you remember how you got to the hospital?" Maddy was quiet for a long moment, picking at the edge of her hospital blanket. When she finally spoke, her words were barely audible. "The bad men brought me here. They said I was sick, but I don't feel sick. I feel scared." Michael felt ice form in his stomach. "What bad men, sweetheart?" "The ones who took me from my foster home," she whispered, tears beginning to well in her eyes. They said my mama left me something important, and that's why they needed me. But I don't understand what they mean." The room seemed to close in around Michael as the implications of her words sank in. This wasn't a case of missing paperwork or administrative confusion. Maddy Lopez had been brought to the hospital against her will by people who clearly had their own agenda. "Maddy," he said gently, "where is your mama now?" "She died last year," Maddy said simply, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children sometimes display in the face of tragedy. "She got really sick and the doctors couldn't help her. But before she died, she gave me this." Maddy reached under her pillow and pulled out a small, worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. She held it protectively against her chest. "She said it was very important, and that someday the right person would help me understand what it means. She said I would know the right person because they would have kind eyes and want to help without expecting anything back." Michael stared at the journal, his medical training warring with a growing sense that he was standing at the edge of something much larger and more dangerous than he could imagine. "Can you tell me what's in the journal?" he asked. "I can't read all the words yet, but there are pictures of medicines and numbers and names of people. Mama said it was her work and that it could help a lot of sick children." Before Michael could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Multiple sets of heavy shoes, moving with purpose toward room 311. "Hide it," Michael whispered urgently, and Maddy quickly tucked the journal back under her pillow just as the door opened. Dr. Harrison entered, followed by the two men in suits that Michael had noticed earlier. Their eyes were cold, professional, and completely focused on Maddy. "Dr. Martin," Dr. Harrison said, his tone carefully neutral, "I wasn't aware you were treating patients outside your surgical department." "I was just checking on our newest patient," Michael replied, standing slowly, making sure she was comfortable. One of the suited men stepped forward, his badge briefly visible, federal identification that Michael couldn't quite read before it disappeared back inside the man's jacket. "That's very kind, doctor," the man said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "But Miss Lopez is under special care protocols. For her safety and the safety of others, we need to limit her interactions to essential medical personnel only." Michael felt Maddy's small hand slip into his, her grip tight with fear. The simple gesture made his decision for him. "I understand," he said carefully. "But as her physician—" "You're not her physician. Dr. Vance will be handling her care going forward." The dismissal was clear, but as Michael looked down at Maddy's frightened face, he realized that walking away was no longer an option. Something about this situation was fundamentally wrong, and this brave little girl who'd asked him if he was an angel deserved someone willing to fight for her. The call to adventure had arrived in the most unexpected form, not as an opportunity for glory or advancement, but as a child's desperate need for protection. And despite every instinct telling him to avoid getting involved in something clearly dangerous, Michael Martin knew his answer. He was staying.
The federal agents left room 311 with pointed looks that made their message crystal clear. Dr. Michael Martin was to have no further contact with Maddy Lopez. As their footsteps echoed down the hallway, Michael stood frozen beside Maddy's bed, his medical oath warring with every survival instinct he possessed. "Dr. Martin," Dr. Harrison said quietly, remaining behind after the agents departed, "I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. These aren't hospital administrators or insurance investigators. These are people with the authority to make serious problems for anyone who interferes with their work." Michael looked down at Maddy, who had pulled her blanket up to her chin and was watching the adults with wide, frightened eyes. The brave little girl who had asked if he was an angel now looked exactly like what she was, a terrified 6-year-old caught in circumstances far beyond her understanding. "What kind of problems?" Michael asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Harrison glanced toward the hallway, ensuring they were alone. "The kind that could end careers, Dr. Martin. The kind that could affect your medical license, your custody of Emma, your entire future. These people have resources and authority that extend far beyond this hospital." The mention of Emma hit Michael like a physical blow.
His daughter was everything to him, the reason he worked double shifts, the motivation behind every difficult decision he'd made since Rachel's death. Emma was already fighting for her life against leukemia. She couldn't afford to lose her father to some misguided attempt at heroism. "I have responsibilities," Michael said slowly, the words feeling like surrender even as he spoke them. "Emma needs me. I can't risk." "You can't risk anything," Dr. Harrison agreed firmly. "Dr. Martin, you're one of our best pediatric surgeons. You have a bright future ahead of you and a daughter who depends on you completely. Don't throw that away for a situation that's clearly beyond your control." Michael nodded reluctantly, but as he turned to leave, Maddy's small voice stopped him. "Are you leaving too?" she asked, and the quiet acceptance in her tone, as if she'd been abandoned so many times that she expected it, made his chest tighten painfully. "I have to go check on my own daughter," Michael said, kneeling beside her bed. "But you'll be okay, Maddy. The doctors here will take good care of you." "Will I see you again?" she asked, clutching her worn stuffed animal, a small rabbit with one ear missing that looked like it had been loved for years. Michael glanced at Dr. Harrison, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. I don't know, sweetheart, but you be brave, okay? Remember what I told you. I'm not an angel, but there are good people here who will help you." As Michael left room 311, he tried to convince himself he was making the rational choice. He had legitimate reasons to avoid getting involved. Emma's medical needs, his own career stability, the very real threat posed by federal agents who clearly had their own agenda. Any reasonable person would walk away from a situation this dangerous and complicated. But walking away proved more difficult than he'd anticipated. During his afternoon surgeries, Michael found himself distracted, his usually steady hands trembling slightly as he worked. The image of Maddy's frightened face kept intruding on his concentration, and more than once his surgical nurse had to redirect his attention back to the patient on the table. "Doctor, are you feeling all right?" Nurse Rodriguez asked during a particularly delicate procedure on a 7-year-old boy with a bowel obstruction. "You seem elsewhere today." "I'm fine," Michael replied, forcing himself to focus on the surgical field before him. But he wasn't fine. Every time he looked at the young patient under his care, he thought about Maddy Lopez, alone in room 311 with no one to advocate for her welfare. After completing his surgeries, Michael headed to Emma's room, hoping that time with his daughter would help clear his head and reinforce why he'd made the right decision to stay uninvolved. "Daddy!" Emma's face brightened as he entered, but her smile faded quickly when she saw his expression. Even at 8 years old and weakened by chemotherapy, Emma possessed an intuitive understanding of people's emotions that sometimes surprised him. "You look sad," she observed, patting the bed beside her. "Did something happen during your surgeries?" "No, sweetheart," Michael said, settling into his familiar chair. "I'm just thinking about something." "Is it about the little girl across the hall?" Emma asked, and Michael's head snapped up in surprise. "How did you—" "I saw the men in suits earlier," Emma explained, matter-of-factly. "They looked scary, and I noticed you talked to her yesterday, but today you seem worried. Is she in trouble?" Michael stared at his daughter, amazed once again by her perceptiveness. "It's complicated, Emma. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about when to help and when to step back." Emma considered this for a moment, then reached for her favorite book, a collection of fairy tales that Rachel had read to her countless times before her death. "Remember the story about the Good Samaritan?" Emma asked, flipping through the pages. "Mama used to say it was her favorite because it was about someone who helped even when it was hard, even when other people walked away."
Michael felt his throat constrict. Rachel had indeed loved that particular story, often using it to explain to Emma why they volunteered at shelters and food banks despite their own financial struggles. "Mama said that sometimes being good means being brave," Emma continued, her small fingers tracing the illustrations in the book, "and that angels are just regular people who choose to help when someone needs them."
The words hit Michael with devastating accuracy. Maddy had asked if he was an angel, and Emma was unknowingly pointing out that he was failing to live up to even the most basic definition of the role. "But Emma," Michael said carefully, "sometimes helping can be dangerous. Sometimes it can put the people we love at risk." Emma looked up at him with Rachel's eyes, wise beyond her years and filled with a compassion that humbled him. "Daddy, if someone was hurting me, would you want other people to walk away because it might be dangerous?" The question hung in the air between them, and Michael realized that his daughter had just exposed the fundamental flaw in his reasoning. He was justifying inaction by focusing on potential risks while ignoring the certain reality that a child was in immediate danger. "No," he admitted quietly, "I would want someone to help you, no matter what. Then maybe that little girl needs someone to be brave for her, too." That evening, Michael walked the halls of Riverside Children's Medical Center, unable to concentrate on his patient rounds or administrative duties. Every time he passed the pediatric wing, he found himself glancing toward room 311, wondering what was happening to Maddy Lopez behind the closed door that now seemed permanently guarded. Dr. Harrison's warnings echoed in his mind: career destruction, loss of medical license, potential custody issues with Emma. The federal agents had made it clear that interference would not be tolerated, and Michael had no illusions about his ability to challenge people with that level of authority and resources. But Emma's words haunted him even more powerfully. Maybe that little girl needs someone to be brave for her, too. That evening, Michael walked the halls of Riverside Children's Medical Center, unable to concentrate on his patient rounds or administrative duties. Every time he passed the pediatric wing, he found himself glancing toward room 311, wondering what was happening to Maddy Lopez behind the closed door that now seemed permanently guarded. Dr. Harrison's warnings echoed in his mind: career destruction, loss of medical license, potential custody issues with Emma. The federal agents had made it clear that interference would not be tolerated, and Michael had no illusions about his ability to challenge people with that level of authority and resources. But Emma's words haunted him even more powerfully. Maybe that little girl needs someone to be brave for her, too. As he completed his evening rounds, Michael found himself standing outside room 311, staring at the closed door. No guards were visible at the moment, but he could see a faint light under the door and hear the soft sound of crying from within. Maddy was in there, alone and frightened, possibly in danger, and he was choosing to walk away because it was safer for him personally. The rationalization that had seemed so reasonable during his conversation with Dr. Harrison now felt like cowardice. Michael thought about his medical oath. First, do no harm. But wasn't allowing harm to continue through inaction a violation of that same principle? Wasn't choosing personal safety over a child's welfare exactly the kind of moral compromise that would have disappointed Rachel? He stood in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes, paralyzed by the weight of the decision before him. On one side lay everything he'd worked for: his career, his financial stability, his ability to provide for Emma's medical care. On the other side was a frightened little girl who had looked at him with complete trust and asked if he was an angel. The crying from room 311 grew quieter, then stopped altogether, and Michael realized that Maddy had probably cried herself to sleep, alone, scared, and abandoned by the one adult who had shown her kindness. The decision crystallized in that moment of silence. He couldn't live with him if he walked away. He couldn't face Emma knowing he'd chosen safety over helping a child in need, and he couldn't honor Rachel's memory by abandoning the values she'd taught him. The refusal of the call was ending. Despite every logical reason to stay uninvolved, despite the very real dangers and potential consequences, Michael Martin was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Tomorrow, he would find a way to help Maddy Lopez, no matter what it cost him. The following morning brought an unexpected ally in the most unlikely form. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology, approached Michael during his pre-surgery coffee break with an expression that immediately caught his attention. The look of someone who had information they weren't supposed to share.
Dr. Martin, she said quietly, settling into the chair across from him in the deserted break room. I understand you've taken an interest in our mysterious patient in room 311. Michael's guard went up immediately. After yesterday's warnings from Dr. Harrison and the federal agents, he wasn't sure who could be trusted. I'm not sure what you mean, Dr. Vasquez. Elena smiled knowingly, pulling out her tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be medical records. Michael, I've been practicing pediatric oncology for 15 years. I've seen every type of case, every kind of family situation, and every possible administrative complication. But I've never seen anything quite like Maddy Lopez. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. More importantly, I've never seen federal agents threaten hospital staff over a routine pediatric case. That tends to make experienced doctors ask questions. Michael studied Elena's face carefully. Dr. Vasquez had a reputation for being brilliant, ethical, and absolutely fearless when it came to advocating for her patients. If anyone could be trusted with sensitive information, it would be her. What kind of questions? He asked cautiously. The kind that start with blood work that doesn't make sense, Elena replied, pulling up a series of lab results on her tablet. Maddy's initial tests showed systematic heavy metal poisoning, specifically a combination of mercury, lead, and arsenic that could only result from deliberate exposure over time.
Michael felt his stomach drop. Deliberate exposure? The levels and combination patterns are consistent with someone being slowly poisoned, Elena continued, her professional composure barely containing her obvious anger. But here's what's really interesting. The metals match a very specific signature that I've seen before, in research papers from about 5 years ago. She scrolled to another screen, showing a published medical study. Dr. Carmen Lopez, brilliant biochemist, published groundbreaking research on environmental toxin exposure in children. She was working on developing treatments for kids who'd been exposed to industrial contamination. Michael's breath caught. Lopez, as in our patient's last name, Elena confirmed. Dr. Carmen Lopez died in a car accident 18 months ago, just 3 weeks after her research facility was broken into and her computers were stolen. The official investigation concluded it was industrial espionage, but the case was never solved. The implications were staggering. You think Maddy is Dr. Lopez's daughter? I think Maddy is the key to understanding what her mother discovered, Elena said firmly, and I think someone has been systematically poisoning that little girl to test antidotes or to prevent her from revealing information about her mother's work. Michael's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. The journal. Maddy mentioned her mother left her a journal with research notes. Elena's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of research notes? She said it had pictures of medicines and numbers, names of people. Her mother told her it could help sick children. Michael, Elena said urgently, if Dr. Lopez documented evidence of systematic poisoning or illegal human experimentation, that information could save countless lives, but it could also destroy some very powerful people. Before Michael could respond, Patricia Williams appeared in the break room doorway, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Dr. Martin, Dr. Vasquez, you need to come quickly, she said breathlessly. Something's happening with Maddy. They rushed to the pediatric wing to find a small crowd gathered outside room 311. Through the open door, they could see Maddy sitting up in bed, but she looked different. Alert, engaged, and for the first time since her arrival, genuinely hopeful. What's going on? Michael asked. That's Dr. Rebecca Foster, Patricia explained, pointing to a woman with silver hair who was sitting beside Maddy's bed, holding her hand. She claims to be a pediatric psychiatrist specializing in traumatized children. Michael frowned. Who authorized a psychiatric consultation? That's the strange part, Patricia replied. She has all the proper credentials, authorization from Dr. Whitmore's office, and federal clearance, but she's not behaving like any psychiatrist I've ever seen." Through the doorway, they could hear Dr. Foster speaking softly to Maddy, and her words made Michael's pulse quicken. "Your mother was a very brave woman, Maddy. She wanted to protect children like you, and she left you something very important to help continue her work." Dr. Foster looked up and noticed the staff watching from the hallway. She stood gracefully and approached them with a warm but determined expression. "You must be Dr. Martin," she said, extending her hand. "Maddy has told me quite a lot about the kind doctor who asked if she needed help with the shadows." Michael shook her hand cautiously. "Dr. Foster, I wasn't aware Maddy was receiving psychiatric evaluation." "Oh, I'm not here in my capacity as a psychiatrist. I'm here because Carmen Lopez was my research partner, and I made a promise to protect her daughter if anything ever happened to her." The revelation hit the group like a thunderbolt. Elena was the first to recover. "You worked with Dr. Lopez on the environmental toxin research?" "Among other things," Dr. Foster replied carefully, glancing around at the listening ears in the hallway. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." Minutes later, they gathered in an unused conference room, with Dr. Foster ensuring the door was closed and the blinds drawn before she began speaking. "Carmen Lopez discovered something that certain pharmaceutical companies would kill to suppress," she began without preamble. "She found evidence that several major corporations have been deliberately exposing children to environmental toxins as part of long-term studies on treatment development." Michael felt sick. "They've been poisoning children deliberately?" "Not just any children," Dr. Foster continued. "Specifically children in foster care, children from broken homes, children who wouldn't be missed or whose disappearances could be easily explained. Carmen had documentation of systematic abuse going back nearly a decade." Elena leaned forward intently. "What kind of documentation? Medical records, financial transactions, correspondence between executives, even video evidence of deliberate contamination events. Carmen was preparing to expose the entire operation when they discovered her investigation." "And they killed her for it?" Michael said, the pieces falling into place. "They tried to make it look like an accident, but Carmen suspected they were closing in on her. She gave me copies of everything and made me promise to protect Maddy if something happened to her." Patricia spoke up from her position by the door. "But why bring Maddy to the hospital? Why not keep her hidden?" Dr. Foster's expression grew grim. "Because they've been systematically poisoning her for the past 18 months, trying to force her to reveal where Carmen hid the original research. They brought her here because they need to keep her alive long enough to find the evidence, but they're running out of time."
Running out of time? For what? Michael asked. "Maddy's condition is deteriorating faster than they anticipated," Dr. Foster explained. "The combination of toxins they've been using is causing permanent neurological damage. If we don't act soon, she'll either die from the poisoning or suffer irreversible brain damage that will make her unable to help them or anyone else." The weight of the situation settled over the group like a heavy blanket. They weren't just dealing with one child in danger. They were confronting a conspiracy that involved systematic abuse of vulnerable children and the murder of a brilliant scientist who had tried to expose it. "What do you need from us?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of what they'd learned. "I need people willing to put their careers, their safety, and their lives on the line to save not just Maddy, but potentially hundreds of other children," Dr. Foster replied. "Carmen's research doesn't just document the crimes. It also contains the antidotes and treatment protocols that could save every child who's been affected." Michael thought of Emma, of all the children he'd treated over the years, of Maddy's innocent question about whether he was an angel. The choice was no longer just about one frightened little girl. It was about becoming the kind of person who stood up against systematic evil, regardless of the personal cost. "What's the plan?" he asked, and saw similar determination reflected in Elena's and Patricia's faces. Dr. Foster smiled for the first time since entering the hospital. "First, we get Maddy stable and begin treating her poisoning. Then, we find Carmen's research. And finally, we make sure the world knows exactly what these people have been doing to innocent children." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Michael realized that his simple act of checking on a crying child had led him to join something much larger than himself. A group of medical professionals willing to risk everything to protect the most vulnerable patients in their care. The mentor had arrived, the allies were in place, and the real work was about to begin. That evening, Michael made a decision that would change everything. After his final surgery of the day, instead of heading home to his apartment or spending time with Emma, he walked deliberately toward room 311, carrying something that represented far more than its simple appearance suggested. His late wife Rachel's medical research notebook, the one she'd used during her graduate studies in public health. The federal agents were absent from their usual posts, presumably believing that their threats had been sufficient to keep hospital staff away from Maddy. Michael slipped quietly into her room, where he found her sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling with an expression of profound loneliness. "Hello, Maddy," he said softly, and watched as her face transformed with surprised joy. "Dr. Martin, you came back?" she whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "But what if the scary men see you?" "Sometimes we have to be brave even when we're scared," Michael replied, settling into the chair beside her bed. "And I realized that I made you a promise to be your friend, and I haven't been keeping that promise very well." Maddy's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you decided I was too much trouble." The simple statement hit Michael like a physical blow, revealing how this 6-year-old child had already learned to expect abandonment. "You're not trouble, Maddy. You're the most important person in this hospital right now, and I'm going to make sure you're safe." He held up Rachel's notebook, its worn leather cover soft with age. "I brought you something. This belonged to my wife, Emma's mama. She was very smart, like your mama, and she wrote down lots of important things in here about helping sick children." Maddy's eyes widened with interest. "She was a doctor too?" "She was studying to be one," Michael explained, opening the notebook to show pages filled with Rachel's careful handwriting and detailed diagrams. "She wanted to help children who got sick from bad things in their environment: dirty water, polluted air, harmful chemicals." "Like what happened to me?" Maddy asked with startling directness. Michael nodded gently. "Dr. Foster told me that you've been very sick because some bad people gave you medicine that wasn't supposed to help you. But my wife wrote about ways to help children get better from that kind of sickness." Maddy reached out tentatively to touch the notebook's pages. "Would she have helped me if she was still here?" "She would have moved heaven and earth to help you," Michael said with absolute certainty. "And she would have wanted me to use everything she taught me to help you too." From under her pillow, Maddy carefully withdrew her mother's journal, the one she'd shown him briefly before the federal agents interrupted them. "Mama's book has pictures like your wife's book," she said, opening it to reveal pages covered with chemical formulas, research notes, and what appeared to be treatment protocols. Michael's breath caught as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. Carmen Lopez's research wasn't just academic theory. It was a comprehensive guide to treating the exact type of poisoning that Maddy had suffered. "Maddy," he said carefully, "would you be willing to let me look at your mama's book? I think it might help me understand how to make you feel better." She nodded solemnly, placing the journal in his hands with the gravity of someone entrusting their most precious possession. Mama said the right person would know what to do with it. As Michael carefully turned the pages, he realized he was holding something far more valuable than he'd initially understood. Carmen Lopez hadn't just documented evidence of corporate crimes, she'd developed comprehensive treatment protocols for every type of toxin exposure she'd encountered. More importantly, she'd included detailed case studies of children who had been successfully treated using her methods. "Look at this," he said softly, pointing to a page filled with before and after photographs of children who had recovered from severe poisoning. "Your mama didn't just study how to help sick children, she actually saved them." Maddy leaned closer, studying the pictures with intense concentration. "That little boy looks like he was really sick, but then he got better." "He did get better," Michael confirmed, reading Carmen's notes about the case. "And your mama wrote down exactly how she helped him, which means we can help you the same way." For the first time since he'd met her, Maddy smiled with genuine hope rather than polite bravery. "Does that mean I won't have to stay in the hospital forever?" "It means we're going to do everything we can to help you get completely better," Michael promised. And as he spoke the words, he realized he was making a commitment that went far beyond medical treatment. He was pledging to protect this child, to honor her mother's work, and to ensure that the people responsible for her suffering faced justice. Maddy reached for his hand, her small fingers still bearing the faint discoloration that Dr. Vasquez had identified as signs of heavy metal poisoning. "Dr. Martin, are you sure you're not an angel? Because you're helping me just like angels do in the stories." Michael felt tears threaten for the second time since meeting this remarkable child. "I'm not an angel, sweetheart. But maybe angels work through regular people who choose to do the right thing." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Dr. Foster entered quietly, followed by Elena and Patricia, all wearing expressions of determined resolve. "How is our patient feeling tonight?" Dr. Foster asked, but her eyes were fixed on the journal in Michael's hands. "She's been very brave," Michael replied, "and she's just shared something extraordinary with us." Dr. Foster's expression grew intense as she recognized Carmen's journal. "Maddy, you've been keeping your mama's work safe all this time?" "I promised her I would," Maddy replied simply. "She said someday the right people would help me understand it." Elena stepped forward, her medical training evident as she gently examined Maddy's hands and arms, noting the subtle signs of ongoing toxin exposure. "Sweetheart, we're going to start giving you some special medicine tonight that will help your body get rid of the bad chemicals. It might make you feel a little sick at first, but then you'll start feeling much better." "Like the children in Mama's pictures?" Maddy asked hopefully. "Exactly like the children in your mama's pictures," Patricia assured her, preparing to begin the complex detoxification protocol that Carmen Lopez had developed. As the team worked together to implement Carmen's treatment plan, Michael realized that this moment represented far more than medical intervention. They were crossing a threshold from which there could be no return, committing themselves not just to treating one child, but to exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate and governmental power. Dr. Foster pulled Michael aside as Elena and Patricia began administering the first round of treatment. "There's something else you need to know," she said quietly. "Carmen's journal doesn't just contain treatment protocols, it also has evidence of where other children are being held and experimented on." Michael felt his blood run cold. How many other children? "Based on Carmen's research, potentially dozens across multiple facilities," Dr. Foster replied. "What we do here with Maddy isn't just about saving her, it's about establishing proof that Carmen's treatments work so we can demand access to help all the other victims." "And if we fail?" Dr. Foster's expression was grim but determined. "Then those children will continue to suffer, and the people responsible will never face justice." "But Michael, we're not going to fail. We have Carmen's complete research, we have Maddy's testimony, and we have a team of medical professionals who refuse to let this continue." As they returned to Maddy's bedside, Michael watched the little girl who had asked if he was an angel submit to the complex medical procedures with a courage that humbled him. She trusted them completely, based on nothing more than his promise to be her friend and help her feel safe. Dr. Martin, Maddy said sleepily as the medications began to take effect. When I get better, can I meet Emma? I'd like to thank her for sharing her daddy with me. The request was so innocent, so hopeful, that Michael had to swallow hard before responding. I think Emma would love to meet you, Maddy. She's been asking about you too. As Maddy drifted off to sleep, surrounded by medical equipment that was finally working to heal rather than harm her, Michael realized that his simple act of checking on a crying child had led him to this moment, surrounded by allies, committed to a cause larger than himself, and responsible for protecting not just one little girl, but potentially dozens of children who had no one else to fight for them. The threshold had been crossed. There was no going back now, only forward into whatever challenges lay ahead.
The first sign of trouble came at 3:47 a.m., when the hospital's main computer system experienced what IT described as an unprecedented security breach. Michael was dozing in the chair beside Maddy's bed, monitoring her response to the detoxification treatment, when Patricia burst into the room with urgent news. "Dr. Martin, we have a major problem," she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. "Someone's been accessing medical records remotely, specifically records related to environmental toxin cases from the past 5 years." Michael came fully awake immediately. "Carmen's research subjects?" "That's what Dr. Foster thinks," Patricia confirmed. "But it gets worse. Hospital security is reporting that someone attempted to break into the pharmacy storage area where we keep the specialized chelation agents we'd been using for Maddy's treatment." Before Michael could respond, Elena appeared in the doorway, her face pale with concern. "Michael, I need you to come with me right now. Dr. Whitmore wants to see you in his office, immediately." The summons to the Chief of Staff's office at nearly 4 a.m. could only mean one thing: their activities had been discovered. Michael looked down at Maddy, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time since her arrival, her small body finally beginning to heal from months of systematic poisoning. "I'm not leaving her alone," he said firmly. "Dr. Foster is on her way up," Elena assured him. "But Michael, you need to understand, Dr. Whitmore isn't alone up there. The federal agents are back, and they've brought reinforcements." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to a tribunal. Michael's mind raced through possible explanations for their actions, but he knew that any justification would sound hollow against the serious charges they were likely facing. Dr. Whitmore's office was crowded with people who had no business being in a hospital at 4 in the morning. The 2 federal agents from before were present, along with 3 others in expensive suits that radiated the kind of authority that came with significant government positions. Behind the desk, Dr. Whitmore looked haggard and deeply uncomfortable. "Dr. Martin," the lead agent said without preamble, "we have reason to believe you've been interfering with a classified federal investigation." "I've been treating a sick child," Michael replied carefully, "which is my job as a pediatric surgeon." "Your job is to perform surgeries," the agent corrected sharply, "not to conduct unauthorized experiments with unproven treatment protocols on federal witnesses." Federal witnesses. The phrase confirmed what Michael had suspected. Maddy wasn't just a victim, she was evidence in a much larger case. One of the new arrivals, a woman with silver hair and calculating eyes, stepped forward. "Dr. Martin, I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen from the Department of Health and Human Services. We're conducting a long-term investigation into pharmaceutical research irregularities, and your patient is a crucial component of that investigation." "You mean she's a crucial component of your cover-up?" Michael replied, his anger overriding his caution. "Carmen Lopez's research provides all the evidence necessary. Evidence that certain pharmaceutical companies have been conducting illegal human experiments on foster children for nearly a decade." Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Martin, perhaps we should discuss this more privately. There's nothing private about systematic child abuse, and there's nothing private about a federal agency that allows it to continue." The lead agent stepped forward menacingly. Dr. Martin, you're dangerously close to obstructing a federal investigation and compromising national security interests." "National security?" Michael laughed bitterly. "You're calling the protection of corporate profits national security." Deputy Director Chen raised her hand to stop the escalating confrontation. "Dr. Martin, you clearly don't understand the complexity of this situation. Yes, we're aware of Dr. Carmen Lopez's research. We're also aware that her evidence, if released prematurely, could destroy ongoing investigations into multiple pharmaceutical companies and compromise the safety of dozens of other children who are currently under protective surveillance." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Other children under protective surveillance? You mean other children being poisoned while you build your case? We mean other children whose safety depends on our ability to gather sufficient evidence to prosecute the people responsible. Evidence that requires maintaining the current operational status while we identify all participants in the conspiracy. Elena, who had remained silent until now, spoke up with barely controlled fury. "So you're allowing children to suffer permanent neurological damage while you collect enough paperwork to satisfy prosecutors. We're preventing a situation where the guilty parties escape justice by destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses," Chen countered. "Dr. Lopez learned that lesson too late." The implication was clear. Carmen Lopez had died because she tried to expose the conspiracy before the government was ready to act. Michael felt his resolve crystallizing into something harder and more determined than simple compassion. "How long?" "How long what?" Chen asked. "How long do these children have to continue suffering while you build your perfect case? Maddy is 6 years old and she's been poisoned to the point of potential brain damage. How many more months of torture is acceptable to your investigation timeline?" Chen's expression remained impassive. "As long as necessary to ensure successful prosecution and the protection of national pharmaceutical research interests." National pharmaceutical research interests. You're protecting the same companies that have been poisoning children. We're ensuring that crucial medical research continues under proper oversight, research that could benefit millions of children in the future.
The conversation was interrupted by Patricia's urgent voice over the intercom system. "Code Blue, room 311. Code Blue, room 311. Michael's heart stopped. Maddy was in crisis. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the door. "Dr. Martin," the lead agent called sharply, "this conversation isn't over." "Yes, it is," Michael replied without turning around. "A child's life is more important than your investigation, your cover-up, or your careers." As he ran toward the elevator, Elena close behind him, Michael heard Deputy Director Chen speaking quietly into her phone. "Initiate containment protocol, full hospital lockdown, effective immediately." The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the pediatric floor. When the doors finally opened, they found the hallway in controlled chaos. Dr. Foster was directing a team of nurses as they worked to stabilize Maddy, whose small body was convulsing violently on the hospital bed. "What happened?" Michael demanded, pushing through to reach her side. "Severe reaction to something," Dr. Foster replied tersely, checking Maddy's vital signs. "Her blood pressure spiked dramatically, then she started seizing. It's almost like she was exposed to a massive dose of the same toxins we've been treating her for." Elena grabbed Michael's arm, her face pale with realization. "Michael, look at her IV line." Following her gaze, Michael saw that Maddy's intravenous drip had been replaced with a different medication bag, one that wasn't part of her prescribed treatment protocol. "Someone switched her medications," he said grimly, the full implication becoming clear. "They're trying to kill her." Dr. Foster looked up from her work, her expression filled with fury and determination. "Well, they're not going to succeed. Michael, I need you to help me implement Emergency Protocol 7 from Carmen's research. It's the most aggressive detoxification treatment she developed." As they worked frantically to save Maddy's life, Michael realized that the forces arrayed against them were more dangerous and more desperate than he'd imagined.
The federal investigation, the pharmaceutical companies, and the hospital administration were all willing to let a 6-year-old child die to protect their various interests. But they had underestimated something crucial: a team of medical professionals who had taken an oath to do no harm and who would fight with everything they had to protect an innocent child. The real battle was just beginning, and Maddy Lopez had become the focal point of a war between those who would sacrifice children for profit and power and those who believed that some things were worth any risk to protect. As Maddy's vital signs began to stabilize under their aggressive treatment, Michael made a silent promise that would define everything that followed. No matter what it cost him personally, he would not let this child become another casualty in someone else's game of power and corruption. 3 days after the attempt on Maddy's life, an unexpected opportunity presented itself that would prove to be both their greatest hope and their most dangerous mistake. Dr. Foster received a call from Dr. James Richardson, an investigative journalist from Medical Ethics Today, who claimed to have been investigating pharmaceutical testing irregularities for over 2 years. Dr. Foster, Richardson said during their carefully arranged meeting in the hospital's chapel, "I've been tracking Carmen Lopez's research since her death. I believe her daughter is the key to exposing the largest medical ethics scandal in modern history." Dr. Foster studied the journalist carefully. Richardson appeared legitimate, mid-40s, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time researching than grooming, and he carried credentials from one of the most respected medical journalism organizations in the country. "What makes you think we have any connection to Carmen Lopez?" Dr. Foster asked cautiously. Richardson smiled knowingly. "Because I've been monitoring unusual pharmaceutical orders at children's hospitals across the country, and Riverside Children's Medical Center recently requisitioned a very specific combination of chelation agents that Carmen developed for treating systematic heavy metal poisoning." Michael, who had been listening from a nearby pew, stepped forward. "And what exactly do you want from us?" "I want to help you save not just one child, but potentially hundreds," Richardson replied earnestly. "I have documentation of similar cases in 12 states, evidence of financial connections between the pharmaceutical companies involved, and most importantly, I have a platform to expose this entire conspiracy to the world." Dr. Foster exchanged glances with Michael. The offer was tempting, almost too tempting. "What would you need from us?" she asked. "Access to Maddy Lopez for an interview, copies of her medical records showing the systematic poisoning and subsequent treatment, and Carmen's research documentation," Richardson explained. "In return, I'll publish a comprehensive expose that will force federal authorities to act immediately to protect all the affected children." Elena, who had been monitoring their conversation from the chapel entrance, joined the group. "Dr. Richardson, how do we know you're not working for the same people who tried to kill Maddy 3 days ago?" Richardson reached into his briefcase and produced a thick folder. "Because I've been documenting their activities for over 2 years, and they've already tried to destroy my career twice." He opened the folder to reveal newspaper clippings, medical records, and what appeared to be corporate correspondence. The evidence was compelling. Richardson had clearly been investigating pharmaceutical corruption long before Carmen Lopez's death, and his documentation included cases that matched the pattern they'd discovered at Riverside. "There's something else," Richardson continued. "I've identified the location of a facility in Nevada where they're currently holding at least 15 children for ongoing experimentation. If we can generate enough media attention, we can force authorities to raid that facility and rescue those children." Michael felt his heart race. 15 children suffering the same fate as Maddy, possibly for years longer than she had endured.
"What's your timeline?" Dr. Foster asked. "I need to publish within the next week," Richardson explained. "My sources indicate that the pharmaceutical consortium is planning to relocate their operations overseas, which would put the children beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement." The urgency was compelling, but something nagged at Michael's instincts. "Dr. Richardson, how did you know to contact Dr. Foster specifically?"
"I've been tracking medical professionals who worked with Carmen Lopez," Richardson replied smoothly. "Dr. Foster's name appeared in several of Carmen's published papers." It was a reasonable explanation, but Michael noticed that Elena looked troubled by something she couldn't quite articulate. Later that evening, as they gathered in the unused conference room to discuss Richardson's proposal, the team found themselves divided. "It's exactly what we need," Patricia argued. "Public exposure is the only way to protect Maddy and force action on the other children." "But something feels wrong about the timing," Elena countered. "He appeared right after the attempt on Maddy's life, with exactly the solution we need, at exactly the moment we're most desperate." Dr. Foster had been unusually quiet during the discussion. Finally, she spoke up. "There's another consideration. Carmen was very specific about protecting her research until the right moment. She believed that premature exposure would result in the destruction of evidence and the elimination of witnesses." "But if Richardson is legitimate," Michael said, "then waiting could mean those 15 children in Nevada suffer unnecessarily while we debate." The moral weight of the decision was crushing. They had the power to potentially save 15 children immediately, but doing so might compromise their ability to save hundreds more if they moved too quickly. "What does Maddy think?" Elena asked suddenly. The question surprised everyone. "She's 6 years old," Patricia protested. "We can't put this kind of decision on a child." "She's not just any child," Michael replied thoughtfully. "She's been living with this her entire life, and she knew her mother better than any of us." They found Maddy in her room, drawing pictures with the art supplies that Emma had sent down from her room. The little girl's improvement over the past few days had been remarkable. The color had returned to her cheeks, her eyes were brighter, and she'd gained enough strength to sit up for extended periods. "Maddy," Dr. Foster said gently, settling beside her bed, "we need to ask you about something important. A man wants to tell Maddy's story to lots of people so they can help other children who are sick like you were." Maddy looked up from her drawing, a picture of herself and Emma playing together in a garden. "Would it help the other children get better?" "We think it might," Michael replied carefully. "But your mama was very careful about who she trusted with her special research. Do you remember if she ever told you anything about when it would be safe to share her work?" Maddy was quiet for a long moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "Mama said I would know the right time because the people helping me would be more worried about doing the right thing than about being safe." The simple wisdom hit the adults like a revelation. Carmen Lopez had understood that the decision about when to expose the conspiracy would ultimately come down to choosing between safety and moral obligation. "She also said," Maddy continued, "that the bad people would try to trick us by pretending to help, but they would always want something too fast before we were really ready." Elena and Michael exchanged significant looks. Richardson's insistence on a one-week timeline, his appearance immediately after the attempt on Maddy's life, his knowledge of exactly which people to contact, it all suggested someone with inside information about their activities. "Maddy," Dr. Foster asked gently, "what do you think we should do?" "I think," Maddy said seriously, "that we should wait until Emma is strong enough too. Mama always said the best plans include everyone who cares about helping." The innocence of her suggestion masked a profound insight. They had been so focused on immediate action that they'd overlooked the importance of building a stronger foundation before taking such a significant risk. "You're absolutely right," Michael said, kneeling beside her bed. "We need to make sure we're really ready before we make any big decisions." As they left Maddy's room, Dr. Foster pulled Michael aside. "Carmen was right about her daughter," she said softly. "That little girl has inherited more than just her mother's research. She's inherited her wisdom, too." The next morning brought confirmation of their decision to wait. Patricia discovered that Dr. Richardson's credentials, while superficially legitimate, had been created only 3 months earlier. More disturbing, the Medical Ethics Today publication he claims to represent had no record of employing anyone by that name. "He's not a journalist," Elena concluded during their emergency meeting. "He's working for the same people who tried to kill Maddy." The realization was chilling. The pharmaceutical consortium had infiltrated their operations so successfully that they'd nearly convinced the team to hand over all of Carmen's research voluntarily.
"They're getting desperate," Dr. Foster observed. "First, they tried to kill Maddy, and when that failed, they tried to trick us into exposing ourselves." Michael thought about Maddy's wisdom, about waiting until they were truly ready, and Emma's continued strength despite her own illness. "Then we need to be smarter than they are. We need to build something they can't infiltrate or destroy." "What do you have in mind?" Elena asked. Michael looked around at his allies. Dr. Foster with her years of research experience, Elena with her medical expertise, Patricia with her institutional knowledge, and most importantly, Maddy with her inherited wisdom and Carmen's revolutionary research. "We're going to do this right," he said firmly. "We're going to build an unassailable case, create multiple backup plans, and most importantly, we're going to make sure that when we do act, we save every single child who needs help, not just the ones who are convenient for a news story." The approach to their most dangerous challenge had revealed the true nature of their opposition, but it had also shown them the strength of their own foundation. They had nearly walked into a trap that would have destroyed everything Carmen Lopez had died to protect. Now they knew better. The real plan was just beginning. The catastrophe struck at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, triggered by the very precautions they had taken to protect themselves. Dr. Foster's decision to create encrypted backups of Carmen's research and distribute them to secure locations had seemed like prudent planning. What they hadn't anticipated was that the pharmaceutical consortium had been monitoring all electronic communications related to their investigation for weeks. Michael was reviewing surgical notes in his office when the hospital's fire alarm system suddenly activated, followed immediately by an announcement over the intercom. "Code Black. Hospital-wide evacuation. This is not a drill." Code Black was reserved for bomb threats or imminent structural collapse, situations requiring immediate evacuation of all patients and staff. Michael's first thought was Emma, his second was Maddy, and his third was the horrible realization that this was no coincidence. Racing toward the pediatric wing, he found chaos. Nurses were rushing to move patients on gurneys and in wheelchairs, medical equipment was being hastily disconnected, and the hallways were filling with people moving in seemingly random directions. In the confusion, it took him several precious minutes to locate Emma's room. "Daddy!" Emma called out as he burst through her doorway. Patricia was there, efficiently preparing Emma for transport while maintaining her IV lines and monitoring equipment. "Where's Dr. Foster?" Michael asked, urgently, "and Maddy?" Patricia's face went pale. "Dr. Foster was in room 311 with Maddy when the alarm started. I haven't seen them since the evacuation began." Michael's blood turned to ice. He left Emma in Patricia's capable hands and fought his way through the crowd of evacuating personnel toward room 311. What he found there stopped him cold. The room was empty. Not just of people, but of everything. Medical equipment, personal belongings, even Maddy's drawings had been stripped from the walls. It was as if Maddy Lopez had never existed. "Dr. Martin," Elena appeared beside him, her face flushed from running. "Thank God you're here. We have a massive problem." "Maddy's gone," Michael said grimly. "It's worse than that," Elena replied, pulling him away from the empty room. "The evacuation isn't real. I checked with the fire department. They never received any alarm signal from the hospital. Someone triggered this manually from inside the building." The implications hit Michael like a physical blow. They used the evacuation to kidnap Maddy and Dr. Foster. "And to clear the hospital of witnesses," Elena added. "Look around. We're almost the only medical staff left on this floor." As if to confirm her observation, the fire alarm suddenly stopped, and the hospital's normal lighting was replaced by the dim emergency illumination that created shadows in every corner. "Dr. Martin, Dr. Vasquez." The voice came from behind them, calm and professional. They turned to find Deputy Director Chen standing in the hallway, flanked by 6 federal agents in tactical gear. "Where are they?" Michael demanded, his composure finally cracking completely. "Dr. Foster and the child have been moved to a secure location for their own protection," Chen replied smoothly. The security breach we discovered in the hospital's computer systems posed an imminent threat to their safety. What security breach? Elena asked sharply. The one that occurred when someone attempted to transmit classified research data to unauthorized recipients. Dr. Foster's actions in copying and distributing Carmen Lopez's research constituted a federal crime and a threat to national security. Michael felt fury building in his chest like a physical pressure. You're talking about a 6-year-old child who's been tortured for 18 months and a doctor who's trying to save her life. I'm talking about a federal witness and classified research materials that could compromise ongoing investigations and endanger other children, Chen countered. Dr. Foster knew the consequences of her actions. Where are they? Michael repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Chen studied him carefully. That depends entirely on your cooperation, Dr. Martin. You have something we need. What could I possibly have that you want? Carmen Lopez's original research journal, Chen replied, the one currently in the possession of your daughter. Michael's world tilted. Emma? What does Emma have to do with any of this? Elena grabbed his arm, her face reflecting the same horror he felt. Michael, when did you last check on Emma? They ran toward the elevator, but found it locked down during the supposed emergency. Taking the stairs 3 at a time, they reached Emma's floor to find it eerily quiet. The evacuation had been real enough to clear most of the medical staff, but selective enough to leave certain people behind. Emma's room was empty, but unlike Maddy's, it showed signs of a struggle. Her medical equipment had been hastily disconnected, and her favorite book, the one containing Carmen's research notes that Michael had hidden between its pages, was missing from her bedside table. They took Emma too, Michael said, his voice barely functioning. Patricia appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Martin, I tried to stop them. They had official transfer orders, federal authorization. They said Emma was being moved to a specialized facility for her own protection. What facility? Elena demanded.
They wouldn't say, Patricia sobbed. But Dr. Martin, they knew exactly where to look for the book. They went straight to Emma's bedside table, like they'd been watching us for weeks. The truth hit Michael with devastating clarity. The pharmaceutical consortium hadn't just been monitoring their electronic communications, they'd been conducting comprehensive surveillance of everyone involved in Maddy's treatment. They knew about Emma's relationship with Maddy, they knew about the research notes hidden in her book, and they'd used both children as leverage to get what they wanted. Chen's voice came from behind them again. Dr. Martin, your daughter is receiving excellent medical care at a secure facility. She'll continue to receive treatment for her leukemia using the most advanced protocols available. Michael turned slowly, his rage so complete that his voice came out unnaturally calm. If you hurt either of those children, I will destroy you. No one wants to hurt anyone, Chen replied. We simply need Carmen Lopez's complete research files, all of them, including the originals that Dr. Foster has been keeping secret. I don't have Carmen's original research, Michael said truthfully. But Dr. Foster does, Chen continued, and she'll provide them in exchange for your daughter's safe return. Unfortunately, Dr. Foster is currently being somewhat uncooperative. Elena stepped forward, her medical training overriding her fear. What about Maddy's medical care? She needs continued treatment for the heavy metal poisoning. Maddy Lopez is receiving appropriate medical supervision, Chen replied dismissively. Her health is stable enough for our current purposes. The casual dismissal of Maddy's welfare, reducing her to a tool for their current purposes, crystallized something hard and implacable in Michael's mind. These people weren't misguided officials trying to build a legal case. They were part of the same system that had systematically tortured children for pharmaceutical profit. You want Carmen's research? Michael said quietly. Then you're going to get it. All of it. Every single piece of evidence documenting the systematic poisoning of foster children, the corporate conspiracy,
the federal complicity, and the murder of Carmen Lopez. Chen's expression shifted slightly. "Dr. Martin, I don't think you understand the complexity." "I understand perfectly," Michael interrupted. "You've kidnapped 2 children to force our cooperation. That makes you kidnappers, not federal agents. And kidnappers don't get to negotiate terms." "What are you proposing?" Chen asked carefully. "I'm proposing that you've made the biggest mistake of your careers," Michael replied, "because now, instead of trying to quietly save one child, we're going to expose everything. Every crime, every cover-up, every child who's been harmed. And we're going to make sure the entire world knows exactly who's responsible." Elena looked at him with surprise, then growing understanding. "Michael, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that they just gave us the motivation we needed to stop playing defense," Michael replied, his eyes never leaving Chen's face. "They want a war? They're about to get one." The ordeal had transformed from protecting Maddy and honoring Carmen's research into something much larger and more dangerous. With both Emma and Maddy now in the hands of their enemies, Michael Martin was about to discover just how far a desperate father would go to protect the children he loved. The pharmaceutical consortium had made their biggest move, but they'd also made their biggest mistake. They'd underestimated what happens when you threaten the children of someone who's already lost everything he could afford to lose. The revelation that would change everything came from the most unexpected source, Dr. Jonathan Whitmore himself. 12 hours after Emma and Maddy's disappearance, the chief of staff appeared at Michael's apartment door at 2 a.m., looking haggard and carrying a briefcase that would reshape their understanding of the entire conspiracy. "Dr. Martin," Whitmore said quietly, glancing nervously around the empty hallway, "we need to talk, and we need to talk somewhere completely secure." Michael, who had been pacing his apartment since leaving the hospital, contemplating increasingly desperate rescue scenarios, was initially suspicious. "If you're here to convince me to cooperate with Chen—" "I'm here to tell you that Sarah Chen isn't who she claims to be," Whitmore interrupted, his voice strained with exhaustion and fear. "And neither is the investigation she represents." They drove in silence to an all-night diner 20 miles from the hospital, where Whitmore led Michael to a corner booth and placed his briefcase on the table with shaking hands. "I need you to understand something before I show you what's in here," Whitmore began. "I've been the chief of staff at Riverside for 8 years. I thought I knew everything that happened in my hospital. I was wrong." He opened the briefcase to reveal thick files, computer printouts, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs. 3 days ago, a real federal investigator contacted me, Agent Maria Santos from the FDA's Criminal Investigation Division. She's been working undercover for 2 years, tracking the pharmaceutical conspiracy that killed Carmen Lopez. Michael felt his pulse quicken. Real federal investigator? "Sarah Chen and her team aren't federal agents," Whitmore explained, pulling out official identification documents. "They're private security contractors working for a consortium of pharmaceutical companies. Their job is to contain the investigation and eliminate evidence, including witnesses." The implications hit Michael like a thunderbolt. Then Emma and Maddy are being held by corporate mercenaries, not government agents, Whitmore confirmed grimly, "which means they're in even more danger than we thought." He spread out a series of surveillance photographs showing Chen and her team meeting with executives from 3 major pharmaceutical companies. Agent Santos has been documenting the entire operation, the fake federal credentials, the systematic intimidation of medical professionals, the cover-up of Carmen Lopez's murder, all of it. Michael studied the photographs, his medical training helping him remain calm despite the fury building inside him. Where is Agent Santos now?
The first sign of trouble came at 3:47 a.m., when the hospital's main computer system experienced what IT described as an unprecedented security breach. Michael was dozing in the chair beside Maddy's bed, monitoring her response to the detoxification treatment when Patricia burst into the room with urgent news. "Dr. Martin, we have a major problem," she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. "Someone's been accessing medical records remotely, specifically records related to environmental toxin cases from the past 5 years." Michael came fully awake immediately. "Carmen's research subjects?" "That's what Dr. Foster thinks," Patricia confirmed. "But it gets worse. Hospital security is reporting that someone attempted to break into the pharmacy storage area where we keep the specialized chelation agents we'd been using for Maddy's treatment." Before Michael could respond, Elena appeared in the doorway, her face pale with concern. "Michael, I need you to come with me right now. Dr. Whitmore wants to see you in his office, immediately." The summons to the Chief of Staff's office at nearly 4 a.m. could only mean one thing: their activities had been discovered. Michael looked down at Maddy, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time since her arrival, her small body finally beginning to heal from months of systematic poisoning. "I'm not leaving her alone," he said firmly. "Dr. Foster is on her way up," Elena assured him. "But Michael, you need to understand, Dr. Whitmore isn't alone up there. The federal agents are back, and they've brought reinforcements." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to a tribunal. Michael's mind raced through possible explanations for their actions, but he knew that any justification would sound hollow against the serious charges they were likely facing. Dr. Whitmore's office was crowded with people who had no business being in a hospital at 4 in the morning. The 2 federal agents from before were present, along with 3 others in expensive suits that radiated the kind of authority that came with significant government positions. Behind the desk, Dr. Whitmore looked haggard and deeply uncomfortable. "Dr. Martin," the lead agent said without preamble, "we have reason to believe you've been interfering with a classified federal investigation." "I've been treating a sick child," Michael replied carefully, "which is my job as a pediatric surgeon." "Your job is to perform surgeries," the agent corrected sharply, "not to conduct unauthorized experiments with unproven treatment protocols on federal witnesses." Federal witnesses. The phrase confirmed what Michael had suspected. Maddy wasn't just a victim, she was evidence in a much larger case. One of the new arrivals, a woman with silver hair and calculating eyes, stepped forward. "Dr. Martin, I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen from the Department of Health and Human Services. We're conducting a long-term investigation into pharmaceutical research irregularities, and your patient is a crucial component of that investigation." "You mean she's a crucial component of your cover-up?" Michael replied, his anger overriding his caution. "Carmen Lopez's research provides all the evidence necessary. Evidence that certain pharmaceutical companies have been conducting illegal human experiments on foster children for nearly a decade." Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Martin, perhaps we should discuss this more privately. There's nothing private about systematic child abuse, and there's nothing private about a federal agency that allows it to continue." The lead agent stepped forward menacingly. "Dr. Martin, you're dangerously close to obstructing a federal investigation and compromising national security interests." "National security?" Michael laughed bitterly. "You're calling the protection of corporate profits national security." Deputy Director Chen raised her hand to stop the escalating confrontation. "Dr. Martin, you clearly don't understand the complexity of this situation. Yes, we're aware of Dr. Carmen Lopez's research. We're also aware that her evidence, if released prematurely, could destroy ongoing investigations into multiple pharmaceutical companies and compromise the safety of dozens of other children who are currently under protective surveillance." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Other children under protective surveillance? You mean other children being poisoned while you build your case? We mean other children whose safety depends on our ability to gather sufficient evidence to prosecute the people responsible. Evidence that requires maintaining the current operational status while we identify all participants in the conspiracy. Alina, who had remained silent until now, spoke up with barely controlled fury. "So you're allowing children to suffer permanent neurological damage while you collect enough paperwork to satisfy prosecutors. We're preventing a situation where the guilty parties escape justice by destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses," Chen countered. Dr. Lopez learned that lesson too late. The implication was clear. Carmen Lopez had died because she tried to expose the conspiracy before the government was ready to act. Michael felt his resolve crystallizing into something harder and more determined than simple compassion. "How long?" "How long what?" Chen asked. "How long do these children have to continue suffering while you build your perfect case? Maddy is 6 years old, and she's been poisoned to the point of potential brain damage. How many more months of torture is acceptable to your investigation timeline?" Chen's expression remained impassive, "As long as necessary to ensure successful prosecution and the protection of national pharmaceutical research interests." National pharmaceutical research interests. You're protecting the same companies that have been poisoning children. We're ensuring that crucial medical research continues under proper oversight, research that could benefit millions of children in the future.
As they prepared to leave the diner, Michael realized that the catastrophic kidnapping of Emma and Maddy had actually provided them with the final pieces they needed to destroy the pharmaceutical conspiracy completely. The criminals had been so confident in their power and protection that they'd used their real names, real facilities, and real communications that Agent Santos could now use as evidence. "Dr. Martin," Santos said as they walked to their cars, "I want you to know that your decision to help Maddy Lopez has saved far more children than just her. The evidence we've gathered will protect thousands of vulnerable children worldwide." Michael thought about Maddy's simple question, "Mister, are you an angel?" and realized that the answer had turned out to be more complex than either of them could have imagined. He wasn't an angel, but sometimes ordinary people could become instruments of justice when they refused to look away from suffering. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, but tonight, for the first time in days, Michael allowed himself to believe that Emma and Maddy would soon be safe, and that Carmen Lopez's sacrifice would finally achieve the justice she had died trying to secure. The federal raid on the Meridian Pharmaceuticals facility began at 5:47 a.m. and ended 43 minutes later with the rescue of Emma, Maddy, Dr. Foster, and 17 other children who had been held for experimental purposes. But as Michael held his daughter in his arms for the first time in 3 days, he realized that their ordeal was far from over. It was about to become very, very public. Agent Santos approached Michael and Emma in the secure medical tent that had been established outside the raided facility. "Dr. Martin, we need to discuss what happens next. This case is going to receive unprecedented media attention, and you need to be prepared for that." Michael, who was checking Emma's medical condition with the desperate thoroughness of both a father and a physician, looked up with concern. "What kind of media attention?" "The kind that makes you the center of a national story," Santos replied seriously. "Dr. Martin, your decision to help Maddy Lopez has uncovered the largest pharmaceutical conspiracy in U.S. history. The evidence we've gathered documents systematic abuse of over 300 children across 12 states, financial fraud exceeding $2 billion, and murder." Emma, despite her exhaustion and the trauma of her captivity, was alert enough to understand the gravity of what Agent Santos was saying. "Daddy, does this mean everyone will know what happened to Maddy?" "It means everyone will know what happened to lots of children like Maddy," Michael replied gently. "And that's going to help make sure it never happens again." Dr. Foster, who was receiving medical treatment in the adjacent tent, called out weakly, "Michael, bring Maddy over here. There's something she needs to understand before the media circus begins." They found Maddy sitting up in her medical bed, looking remarkably alert despite her ordeal. The past few days of proper medical care had continued to reverse the effects of her systematic poisoning, and her natural resilience was becoming increasingly evident. "Dr. Foster," Maddy said seriously as Michael and Emma approached, "are we safe now?" "We're safe, sweetheart," Dr. Foster confirmed. "But Maddy, do you remember what your mama told you about sharing her special research?" Maddy nodded solemnly. "She said someday I might need to tell lots of people about it so other children could be helped." "That someday is now," Dr. Foster explained gently. "Agent Santos needs to tell the whole world about what the bad people did, and about your mama's research that can help make sick children better." Agent Santos knelt beside Maddy's bed, her expression kind but serious. "Maddy, there are going to be reporters and television cameras and lots of people who want to hear your story. Are you ready for that?" Maddy looked at Michael, then at Emma, then back at Agent Santos. "Will it help the other children?" "It will help hundreds of other children," Santos confirmed. "Then I'm ready," Maddy said with a determination that belied her 6 years. The first news van arrived at Riverside Children's Medical Center before they even returned from the raid site. By noon, the hospital parking lot looked like a staging area for a major media event, with satellite trucks, reporters, and camera crews from every major network in the country. Dr. Whitmore held the first press conference at 2 p.m., standing behind a podium that bristled with microphones, while news cameras captured every word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "What I'm about to tell you represents one of the darkest chapters in modern medical history, but also one of the most inspiring stories of courage and compassion I've ever encountered." The basic facts were staggering enough to dominate news cycles for weeks. A pediatric surgeon's simple act of kindness had uncovered systematic pharmaceutical abuse, saved hundreds of children, and exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate and shadow government operations. But it was the human story that captured the public's imagination. "Dr. Michael Martin," Whitmore continued, "heard a child crying in the night and chose to help. That decision, made by a single father working to save his own daughter's life, ultimately saved hundreds of other children and brought justice for a murdered scientist whose only crime was trying to protect vulnerable children from exploitation." The questions from reporters came rapid-fire, but Michael found himself surprisingly calm as he faced the media for the first time. Agent Santos had prepared him well, and more importantly, he had something that made facing any challenge easier: the absolute certainty that they had done the right thing. "Dr. Martin," called out a reporter from CNN, "what was it about Maddy Lopez that made you risk your career and your family's safety to help her?" Michael looked down at Maddy, who was sitting beside him in a wheelchair, wearing a bright yellow dress that Emma had picked out for her. "She asked me if I was an angel," he replied simply. "I told her I wasn't, but that sometimes regular people can choose to help when someone needs them. It turned out she was the one teaching me what that really means." "What will you do now?" asked another reporter. Before Michael could answer, Dr. Foster spoke up from her wheelchair beside them. "We're going to establish the Carmen Lopez Foundation for Child Protection," she announced, surprising everyone, including Michael. "Dr. Martin and I will be working together to ensure that Carmen's research is used to help every child who needs it, and to prevent anything like this from ever happening again." The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the press corps, but it was Maddy's voice that provided the moment that would be replayed on news programs around the world. "My mama said that when bad people try to hurt children, good people have to be braver than they want to be," she said into the microphones, her voice clear and strong. "Dr. Martin was brave enough to help me, and now lots of other children don't have to be scared anymore." The press conference continued for over an hour, with questions about the legal proceedings, the other rescued children, and the ongoing investigation. But the image that would define the story was captured in a single photograph: Michael kneeling beside Maddy's wheelchair while Emma stood behind them, both children wearing matching bracelets that spelled out "Brave" in colorful beads. Later that evening, as they watched news coverage from Emma's hospital room, Michael realized that their story had already begun to take on a life of its own. Social media was flooded with messages of support, medical professionals from around the world were offering assistance, and most importantly, other potential victims were coming forward with their own stories. "Daddy," Emma said, as they watched a report about 3 more pharmaceutical facilities being raided based on evidence from Carmen's research, "do you think we'll ever have a normal life again?" Michael considered the question seriously. Their story was being called "The Angel Doctor and the Brave Children" by some news outlets, "The Pediatric Conspiracy" by others, and their names would forever be associated with one of the most significant medical ethics cases in history. "I don't think our lives will ever be normal in the way they used to be," he replied honestly. "But Emma, maybe normal was never the goal. Maybe the goal was always to help other people, and we just didn't realize it until Maddy showed us how." Agent Santos appeared in the doorway with an update that would reshape their understanding of the story's impact yet again. "Dr. Martin, I thought you should know. We've received reports from law enforcement agencies in 15 countries. Carmen Lopez's research is being used to identify and shut down similar operations worldwide." The scope was almost impossible to comprehend. Their decision to help one frightened little girl had triggered a global movement to protect vulnerable children from pharmaceutical exploitation. "There's something else," Santos continued. "The president is planning to sign emergency legislation next week that will create new protections for children in foster care and establish federal oversight of pharmaceutical research involving minors. They're calling it the Carmen Lopez Act." As Michael absorbed the magnitude of what their actions had set in motion, he thought about Maddy's innocent question that had started it all. She had asked if he was an angel, but the truth was more complex and more hopeful than either of them could have imagined. Angels, he realized, might not be supernatural beings who descend from heaven to fix the world's problems. They might simply be ordinary people who choose to answer when they hear a child crying in the night, and who refuse to stop caring no matter how high the cost becomes. The road back to normal was impossible, but the road forward towards justice and protection for vulnerable children had never been clearer. 6 months after the rescue, Dr. Michael Martin stood in the gleaming new headquarters of the Carmen Lopez Foundation for Child Protection, watching Maddy Lopez demonstrate the revolutionary treatment protocols that her mother had developed to a room full of international medical experts. The transformation was complete, not just of Maddy's health, but of everyone whose lives had been touched by their incredible journey. "The key principle," Maddy explained to the assembled doctors and researchers, her voice clear and confident as she pointed to the treatment charts displayed on large screens, "is that Mama's medicine doesn't just clean out the bad chemicals, it helps the body remember how to protect itself." The audience, pediatric specialists from 23 countries, listened with rapt attention as this 7-year-old girl, now completely recovered from her ordeal, explained complex medical concepts with the clarity of someone who had lived through every aspect of the treatment process. Dr. Foster, who now served as the Foundation's chief medical officer, smiled with pride from her position beside the podium. "Maddy has become our most effective teacher," she explained to the international visitors. "She understands the treatment protocols from a patient's perspective in ways that help us refine and improve them for other children." Michael, watching from the back of the auditorium, marveled at how far they had all come. The Carmen Lopez Foundation occupied a state-of-the-art facility just outside the city, funded by a combination of government grants, international donations, and, ironically, the massive financial settlements from the pharmaceutical companies that had been prosecuted for their crimes. "Dr. Martin," called out Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Tokyo Children's Hospital, "can you tell us about the expansion of treatment centers? We understand you're opening facilities in 12 countries." Michael stepped forward to address the group, still sometimes surprised by his new role as the Foundation's executive director. His transformation from hospital surgeon to international advocate had been complete, but it had happened so gradually that he barely noticed until moments like these. "The expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule," he replied, pulling up a world map showing the Foundation's global reach. "We've successfully treated over 400 children in the past 6 months, and we're training medical teams in 15 languages to ensure that Carmen's protocols can be implemented anywhere they're needed." Emma, now in remission from her leukemia and serving as the Foundation's youth ambassador, joined him at the podium. Her hair had grown back in thick, healthy curls, and her energy levels had returned to normal thanks to treatments that had been refined using Carmen's research. "The coolest part,"
Emma said, addressing the medical professionals with the casual confidence of someone who had grown up in the spotlight, is that we're not just helping kids who were hurt by the bad pharmaceutical companies. Mama Carmen's research works for lots of different kinds of poisoning, so we're helping children all over the world who got sick from pollution and contaminated water and industrial accidents. Dr. Hassan al-Rashid from the Cairo Children's Medical Center raised his hand. Miss Emma, can you tell us about the new early detection protocols? Emma beamed, clearly in her element. Oh, that's the best part. Dr. Foster figured out how to use Mama Carmen's research to identify children who have been exposed to toxins even before they get really sick. So now we can help them before they suffer like Maddy did. The presentation continued for another hour, with Maddy and Emma working together to explain treatment protocols that were now being used to help thousands of children worldwide. Michael watched them with a mixture of pride and amazement. These two remarkable children had not only survived their ordeals, but had emerged as leaders in a global movement to protect vulnerable children. After the international visitors departed, Michael found himself alone with Dr. Foster in her office, surrounded by photos of children who had been successfully treated using Carmen's protocols. Sometimes I look at all this, Dr. Foster said, gesturing around the foundation headquarters, and I can barely believe it started with you hearing a little girl crying in a hospital room. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd walked past room 311 that night, if I'd been too tired, too focused on my own problems, too afraid to get involved. But you didn't walk past, Dr. Foster replied firmly. And that's what made all the difference. Michael, do you realize that the protocols we've developed here are now being taught in medical schools around the world? Carmen's research has become the gold standard for treating environmental toxin exposure in children. The scope of their impact was still difficult to comprehend. The Carmen Lopez Foundation had grown from a simple desire to help one child into an international organization that employed over 200 medical professionals and had saved thousands of lives. There's something else, Dr. Foster continued, pulling out a leather-bound folder. I received a call from the Nobel Committee yesterday. They're considering the foundation for next year's Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize? He asked in shock. For contributions to international child welfare and medical ethics. The committee considers our work to be a significant advancement in protecting the world's most vulnerable populations. Before Michael could fully process this news, Maddy and Emma burst into the office, their faces flushed with excitement. Dr. Foster, Dr. Martin, we just got the best news ever. The Children's Hospital in Bangladesh just reported their first complete recovery using Mama's protocols. A little boy who was poisoned by contaminated drinking water. He's completely better. Michael knelt down to their level, still amazed by how these two children had become the heart and soul of everything the foundation accomplished. That's wonderful news. How many children does that make this month? 67, Maddy replied proudly, and 3 of them sent us drawings. She produced a collection of colorful artwork from children around the world who had been treated using Carmen's protocols. Each drawing was a testament to recovery, hope, and the global community that had formed around Carmen Lopez's revolutionary research. As Michael looked at the drawings, a child from Kenya showing herself playing soccer again, a boy from Peru drawing his family reunion after months of hospitalization, a girl from Bangladesh depicting herself back in school, he realized that their transformation was complete in ways he never could have imagined. He was no longer just a pediatric surgeon trying to save his own daughter. He was no longer just a man who had helped one frightened child. He had become something that Carmen Lopez had envisioned but never lived to see. A leader in a global movement that treated every child's suffering as equally important, regardless of their nationality, social status, or family circumstances. Dr. Martin, Maddy said, tugging on his sleeve to get his attention. What's that, sweetheart? Do you remember when I asked if you were an angel? I remember. Well, I figured out the answer, she announced with the satisfaction of someone who had solved a complex puzzle. You're not an angel. You're something better. What's that? You're a person who helps angels do their work. And now there are lots of people like you all over the world helping angel children get better. As Michael looked around at the Foundation headquarters, at the photos of recovered children, at the international medical protocols bearing Carmen's name, and most importantly, at Maddy and Emma, two remarkable children who had transformed from victims into leaders, he realized that Maddy was absolutely right. The resurrection was complete. They had all been transformed from who they were into who they were meant to be, and in the process, they had created something that would continue helping children long after their own story was finished. 5 years later, Dr. Michael Martin walked through the corridors of Riverside Children's Medical Center for what would be his final visit as a practicing surgeon. Tomorrow, he would officially retire from surgery to focus entirely on the Carmen Lopez Foundation. But tonight, he had one last tradition to fulfill, checking on a crying child in room 311. The room that had once housed Maddy Lopez now held 8-year-old Sophia Chen, a newly arrived patient whose circumstances were remarkably similar to Maddy's had been. Sophia had been found abandoned outside a hospital in San Francisco, showing signs of systematic poisoning, with no medical records and no family to advocate for her care. But unlike 5 years ago, Sophia was not alone. Dr. Martin called out Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's new chief of pediatric toxicology, as she emerged from Sophia's room. "Perfect timing. We've just completed Sophia's initial assessment using the Lopez protocols." The Lopez protocols had become standard medical practice worldwide, integrated into emergency response procedures at children's hospitals in over 40 countries. What had once been Carmen's revolutionary research was now routine medical care, saving an estimated 3,000 children annually from various forms of environmental poisoning. "How is she responding?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer from Dr. Walsh's expression. "Remarkably well," Dr. Walsh replied, with the satisfaction of someone who had seen these protocols work hundreds of times. "We caught the poisoning early, thanks to the new detection methods that Dr. Foster developed. Sophia should make a complete recovery within 6 weeks." Michael smiled, remembering when such a prognosis would have seemed miraculous. Now it was simply expected, the normal result when Carmen's research was properly applied by trained medical professionals. "Is she frightened?" he asked, remembering Maddy's terror during those first nights. "She was until about an hour ago," Dr. Walsh replied. "Then our special visitors arrived." Through the doorway, Michael could see Maddy and Emma, now 12 and 13 respectively, sitting beside Sophia's bed. Maddy was showing Sophia the same worn stuffed rabbit she'd carried during her own hospitalization, while Emma was reading from a children's book written specifically for young poisoning patients. "Sophia," Maddy was saying gently, "I know you're scared, but I promise you're going to be okay. The doctors here are the best in the world at helping children like us." "Were you sick like me?" Sophia asked, in accented English, her small voice filled with hope. "I was very sick," Maddy confirmed, "but look at me now. I travel all over the world helping doctors learn how to help other children. And Emma here was sick too, but now she's so healthy she plays 3 sports at school." Emma laughed, displaying the energy and confidence of a completely healthy teenager. "Plus, we get to meet amazing kids like you all the time. It's actually pretty cool." Michael watched this interaction with deep satisfaction. The Carmen Lopez Foundation had established a peer support program that paired recovered children with newly diagnosed patients, creating a network of hope that spanned the globe. Children who had once been victims now served as healers and teachers, proving that recovery was not just possible, but expected. "Dr. Martin," Sophia called out, having noticed him in the doorway. "Are you the angel doctor that Maddy told me about?" The question made Michael laugh, remembering when Maddy had asked him something remarkably similar in this very room. "I'm just a doctor who tries to help," he replied, settling into the chair that had once been his second home during those desperate nights 5 years ago. "But you're the one who saved Maddy," Sophia insisted, with the earnest determination of a child who had already heard the story that had become legend throughout the pediatric medical community.
Actually, Michael said, looking at Maddy with deep affection, Maddy saved me. She taught me what it really means to help someone. Later that evening, as Sophia drifted off to sleep surrounded by new friends and the best medical care in the world, Michael joined Maddy and Emma in the hospital's memorial garden. A bronze statue now stood where Carmen Lopez's small plaque had once been, a life-size sculpture of a woman in a lab coat kneeling beside a child, with an inscription that read, "Dr. Carmen Lopez, her research continues to heal children worldwide." "It's weird being back here," Emma said, studying the statue thoughtfully. "Sometimes I forget how scared we used to be."
"I don't think we should forget," Maddy replied seriously. "Remembering how scared we were helps us understand how other children feel when they first get sick." Michael marveled at the wisdom these two young women displayed. They had taken their trauma and transformed it into empathy, their suffering into strength, their fear into fierce determination to help others. "Dr. Martin," Maddy said suddenly, "I have something to tell you. I've been accepted to the accelerated medical program at Stanford." Michael's heart swelled with pride. At 17, Maddy would be starting medical school, following in her mother's footsteps, but with a wisdom and compassion that came from having lived through the very conditions she would spend her life treating. "And I've been accepted to the International Relations program at Georgetown," Emma added. "I want to work on global health policy, maybe with the United Nations someday." As they sat together in the garden where this extraordinary journey had begun, Michael realized that the true measure of their success wasn't in the awards the foundation had won, or the thousands of children they had saved, or even the global recognition of Carmen's research. The true measure was sitting beside him, two remarkable young women who had taken the worst experiences of their childhood and transformed them into a mission to protect other children from similar suffering. "You know," Michael said quietly, "your mother would be incredibly proud of both of you." "Both mothers," Emma corrected gently, and Michael felt his throat tighten as he thought of Rachel, who had started this journey by teaching him the importance of helping others even when it was difficult. The sound of soft crying drifted across the garden from the pediatric wing, and all three of them looked up toward the hospital windows. "Someone needs help," Maddy observed, standing up immediately. "Should we go check?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer. Michael looked at these two extraordinary young women, children who had once been patients themselves, now dedicated to ensuring that no child would ever suffer alone the way they once had. "Yes," he said simply, "we should go check." As they walked back toward the hospital together, Michael realized that this was how it was supposed to work. The children they had saved were now saving others. The kindness that had begun with one man answering a crying child's question had multiplied into a global movement that would continue long after any of them were gone. Maddy's original question, "Mister, are you an angel?" had been answered in ways none of them could have imagined. Angels, it turned out, weren't supernatural beings who descended from heaven to fix the world's problems. They were ordinary people who chose to respond when they heard suffering, who refused to look away when children needed help, and who understood that the greatest healing came not from medicine alone, but from ensuring that no child ever had to face their darkest moments alone. The crying had stopped by the time they reached the pediatric wing. Someone else had already answered the call. A young resident was sitting beside a frightened child's bed, reading a story with the patient attention of someone who understood that healing involved more than medical protocols. The cycle continued, the legacy grew, and somewhere in the world, another child who might have suffered alone was instead surrounded by people who cared enough to answer when they called for help. The transformation was complete, but the mission was eternal. And in children's hospitals around the world, the question that had started it all was still being asked and answered, one crying child at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.